Welcome everybody to this, I think, very interesting angle on candidate experience. We wanted to get together today to talk about the psychology that's involved in the job search, particularly for people that have already achieved seniority in their career path. I don't know whether you're aware of it, but anybody who's got any friends or contacts or anybody sort of on the market right now, it's not a particularly good market for a lot of people. And I think it's particularly challenging for people who've actually achieved a degree of seniority. Reason why, there's simply less jobs. Obviously, most organizations are a pyramidal structure. So, the more senior you get, there's going to be less opportunities in the general sense. But also it's difficult in another way because actually a job seeker that has had a great deal of experience might in fact be an inexperienced job seeker because they haven't actually done it in the same frequency as someone who's just let's say a recent graduate who's been applying all the time and been in there. So we wanted today to explore what is the psychological angles of the candidate experience for senior people who are on the job market. And how does that then how does that information help us as recruiters and employers, rethink and redesign a recruitment process as appropriate for this demographic. So hopefully you're happy with this conversation. This will be recorded, of course. So if you aren't able to make it, you get access to this on replay. But this is live right now. So if you're here and you want to join us, make sure you join us in the chat. And we'll interact with you there. I'm your host, Hung Lee. Let's just go through to see who else is joining us in this conversation. Adam, let's go with you first. Can you introduce yourself real quick? Who are you? What it is you do? And tell us a little bit about Chronify, actually.
Thanks, Hung. Yes, Adam Bird, CEO, co-founder of Chronify. Really what we do, certainly in this sector, is we help kind of make interview scheduling more efficient. So we power the interview scheduling of about 75 different recruiting systems right now. Plus we have our own sort of tooling on top to augment tools like Greenhouse, Smart Recruiters, etc., that need far more, especially at these kind of more senior hires where the recruiting gets horribly complicated and the kind of flexibility required to work around multiple calendars. And as part of this work and trying to understand the kind of the problems that people are facing, we do an annual survey of candidates. And so for the last 3 years, we've done 6,500 candidates. We've just got the data for the 2024 report. It's 12,500 candidates across USA and Europe. And some really interesting insights to not the kind of the demands, the requests, the kind of wishes of candidates, but actually the increasing levels of stress that we're seeing across the entire candidate spectrum. So really keen to talk about this today.
Yeah, fantastic stuff, Adam. And by the way, market, obviously, we have cost of living crisis. We have all of those externalities. I think that obviously elevates the stress level because it actually means it's more significant for people who find themselves on the job market. It's a lot more stressful. So no surprise, by the way, candidate experience ratings have generally been trending down over the last 2 years. I think it was Kevin Grossman's work at the Candies did something similar where they just tracked over time sort of how people were rating their experience in the job search, and it was trending down. And I think it matches with where we're at on the economic side. Let's go around as we see it. Vicky, good to see you. Can you quickly introduce yourself? Who are you? What it is you do?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Vicky Saunders. I'm the founder of the EVP consultancy. After spending 10 years leading EVP and employer brand at Boots, BAE Systems and Currys. And yeah, my role now is about helping organizations to develop and activate their EVPs and employer brands.
Fantastic stuff. Let's move on to you, Helen. Helen James, quickly introduce yourself. Who are you? What it is you do?
Yeah, hi, I'm Helen. I'm a global talent acquisition leader. My superpower is change and transformation. And yeah, that's me.
Fantastic. Yeah, great to see you, Helen. And we have Marlin as well. Marlin, can you quickly introduce yourself? Who are you? What it is you do?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Marlin Moetzi. I'm a licensed psychologist, and I've been working with organizational development and specializing in recruitment for the past 8 years. And right now I'm working as a consultant. So yeah, running my own business for once.
Fantastic stuff. Okay, folks, listen, we have a wonderful panel here today. If you have any questions or any contributions you want to make sure you communicate with us in chat. In fact, if you can hear us okay, let me know in the chat whether the audio and visuals are okay from all of our guests here. And make use of the Q&A feature as well if there's any particular questions you want us to get to, because we'll get to them towards the end of the conversation. Okay, let's talk about the job market as we see it. And I think Helen and Vicky, I think both of you have seen sort of direct experience of this in recent times. Tell us a little bit about that. Helen, if we can go to you, what has been your experience of just investigating the job market to date? What have you kind of encountered externally before we think about the psychology part of it?
It's tough. And there are some really great people at the moment looking for jobs, which I've never really known before. There's this whole piece about being ghosted and you don't hear back from organisations as well as agencies. And it's also, I don't think people are sharing as much. I know there's this whole supportive network, don't get me wrong, but you mentioned it earlier, Hung, you know, it's a hard environment. There are budget cuts, teams are being cut. So for me, and what I really enjoy and what really gets me out of bed is this change and transformation piece. And I'm not seeing any of it. I'm not saying it's not happening, but whether people just aren't going out to the market to sort of say, right, Helen, 6 months, 3 months, 12 months, whatever, or they're keeping it inside to obviously make sure that all their teams can work on things. So yeah, it's brutal, but it's an interesting dynamic as well that I haven't seen before. And I was contracting for an awful lot of years, and you know, now obviously permanent. It's a bit odd actually.
Yeah, so maybe that's the first thing we need to think about. It's actually surprising to a lot of people to encounter a market like this because it has, I mean, again, I was at LinkedIn Talent Connect yesterday. There were 600 people in the room. There was lots of people out there looking for work in that group. Senior people, very highly credible, individuals that you would say in a better market would generally never even enter the market because they'd be headhunted away, and you know they wouldn't actually ever be thinking about creating CVs and applying for jobs. But there they were, and they were talking about doing a lot of applications. A lot of ghosting is going on, and a lot of long processes that don't seem to go anywhere. And it's just a very, very tough market. So surprise is maybe the first thing we need to recognize, that this is not something people might be used to. And the external conditions, I think, do need to be recognized. Because sometimes when you're in a job search, if you are doing it completely by yourself without interaction with others, you might kind of turn that inward and start questioning yourself and saying, you know, is it me that's just getting rejected, or is it me that's getting ghosted? Whereas in fact, it's a market-wide phenomenon. I had a conversation yesterday with a lady who exactly told me this. It was like turning the external environment internally and thinking, look, what's my problem? And we had to say, you know what, part of the reason why you need to go and connect with others is to hear the experience of other people and say, you know what, it's not that unusual that you're encountering this very, very tough market out there. So yeah, Steve, thank you for your comment there. Lots of reorganizations, and people in our space, the function, talent acquisition, of course, that's been one of the primary areas that's been cut. It was highlighted actually by very famous CEOs. Mark Zuckerberg highlighted it in one of his big announcements that actually the TA function is going to be cut down. So this is market wide, and it's affecting our industry particularly. Vicky, have you got anything to add on that? Any thoughts on sort of the job search, how we encounter it so far?
Yeah, so I've heard many times that TA is a bit like the canary in the mine. It's a good indicator of where the market's going to go. If companies start pulling back on hiring people into TA, then they're tightening their belts and maybe doing some reorgs, redundancies, etc. So I do feel like we're feeling in the TA sector more, we feel it more acutely probably. But yes, it is tough, and I would echo what Helen said. I know a lot of people who are fantastic employer brand leaders. Six-figure salary employer brand leaders who are out of work right now. And they are the kind of people with, like you say, the credibility, that the track record, that normally are just headhunted and move into the next role straight away. So it's really hard.
Yeah. Marlon, let's go to you on this. And what would you say are the kind of the things that people need to think about when they're unused to this experience, particularly again, individuals that are senior into the marketplace who have experience of themselves, of their professional work, but maybe it is like a very new and different sort of market that they've encountered.
Yes, so I think the biggest challenge is, as you say, to once again enter a market that you know nothing about. All of us are, I mean, no matter if you were born in the 90s or if you were born in the 50s, all of us have been schooled that we are our experience. So we tend to identify ourselves and our competency with experience and knowledge and skills that we have practiced on. And so senior executives and people who have been working with management have identified as leaders, as experts, and they tend to identify and describe themselves with their experience and what they have done so far. And right now, the current and also the future of recruiting doesn't focus as much on experience and knowledge and skills as it has been. We are focusing much more on potential, and people working competency-based know to put personality and personal traits first, and your problem-solving skills. And I think this switch is the biggest shock that you will meet, because you will sort of prepare yourself, you will write your resume, and you will prepare how to describe yourself and your experience and that heavy weight that you might have in your backpack. And then comes a question that focuses more on who you are as a person, and you are asked to describe yourself in the terms of behaviors. And this is something that no one is really trained in. And all of a sudden, someone tells you that your experience, your skills, your knowledge isn't worth as much as it has been previously. And I think this will be a big challenge for many people entering the market right now.
That's a really interesting observation, because this leans into this skills-based hiring kind of consensus that we seem to be racing toward. And actually, skills-based hiring explicitly says experience is less important. It's actually directly part of the thing. So maybe I didn't even connect those two things, but maybe it is a case that a lot of the people who've got experience in their professional careers have lent on the fact that they've got experience as a way to get through the door. But perhaps there's the kind of this tectonic shift underneath it, which is saying, you know what, we're going to consider this less important, and bulk up assessments, let's say, to identify the traits, characteristics, or skills that might be more important. So I didn't even consider that skills-based hiring may actually be a component of the candidate experience for experienced job seekers out there. Did anyone else, I mean, a quick one in the audience, did anyone else even think about that? Or am I just like slow to the chase here? Adam, you want to say something?
Yeah, I think it's interesting just picking up on that point of moving to a more sort of skills-based assessment. We see this a lot. We see more stress in sort of creative roles in our research rather than kind of other roles. And I think they've been kind of closer to being able to provide assessments that allow people to be kind of judged on their skills as like a task. And people are trying to create these, they're trying not to make wrong hiring decisions. So what they're trying to do is learn how to make those assessments, which is creating more complicated hiring processes. And especially if you're not used to doing a task as part of an interview process, that's a new thing if you haven't been kind of looking for jobs in more recently. But of course, that in turn requires a tighter feedback loop, because that person is laying themselves bare. How did I do? I've got no idea. I never do these things. And so more demand on that kind of the communication piece, which if you end up ghosting, if you don't end up communicating, I wonder whether that's why we're seeing more stress in the kind of more creative industries than we are seeing perhaps in other industries. We're still seeing stress, but it seems to be from the data that's where it's especially present.
That's a really interesting observation again. You know, the idea, let's say, again, we've kind of segued into the skills-based hiring kind of angle, but let's explore it a little bit more. Skills-based hiring ultimately means there's an additional focus on assessment. So we're going to degrade the CV and experience as something that we consider, not ignore it, but we're going to degrade it in terms of the weighting, and we're going to assess this person. Assessing this person requires you to put some energy into that. You've got to do an assessment, create a task, do something. But then if the company then fails to feed back to the person that's produced that assessment, then obviously that's going to be very, very damaging to the candidate's perception of that organization, because you've actually invested a lot more time into the process. Consider you apply for a job,
but also the perception of themselves as well. And I think that's really, really important, because the company do 10, 20 assessments of 10, 20 people. So for them, it's normal. For the candidate, this might be the first time they've ever had to do this as part of an interview process.
Probably.
Yeah.
And even if they've done it before, right now, trend that we're seeing here in Sweden, because we've been working a lot with assessments early on in recruitments for many, many years. We've been working with logic reasoning tests, but also personality assessments for many years. And it's getting so common that there are more and more vendors out there, more and more companies are using assessments. So even if you have sort of understood why you should take these assessments, you still shouldn't be forced into, if you're applying for 5 jobs, you shouldn't have to take these tests 5 times. Because when you apply for a job, traditionally you write one and you write maybe 1 cover letter and you have 1 conversation. And now you have to also take the assessments 5 different times if you're applying for 5 jobs. And I think this is also a big obstacle of not having a candidate-centric perspective when we are using new methods. And I think we have completely failed when it comes to the communication of the purpose of using assessments early on and what skill-based hiring actually means. Because no one is saying that your experience is worthless. No one is saying that knowledge is useless. I think all of us can sort of relate to, we are not the same person as we were when we started a new profession. It doesn't matter if you're 19 or if you're 52 when you start a new profession, but you are never as good as you are when you have some experience. But experience is extremely hard to measure and to evaluate early on in the process, which is why you need more assessments to fairly assess who this person is and how they will behave at the job and how to use their experience, how to use their knowledge. Because today we know that interhuman factors and the relational factors are more evident into work performance than previously when it was more task-based, which is also why we see personality having an upswing, and intelligence and a problem-solving skill actually has a lesser factor when it comes to predicting work performance now.
You know, very interesting chat as well. Keep the conversation going in the chat stream, by the way. We're gonna go into the cultural differences. I think you're right. We need to explore different regions. You know, where this sits is different. But Helen, let's go to you. I got the sense you wanted to make an observation with all of that sort of use of assessments and so on.
Just going back to the interview process, really, or the whole recruitment process. If the organisation is looking at skills-based hiring, then you could make that a feature on the website, or just say, has everybody heard about this? So all candidates understand this is the expectation of, so, you know, you will then probably look at your CV in a different way and think, right, this now needs to be a skills-based CV, which, you know, could take a little while to get the versions correct. But at least if you know, it's like anything, isn't it? If you know what's expected or what the organisation are looking for, you can then at least give yourself a bit more of a fighting chance, actually. And there's so much around and about skills-based hiring that we've all heard about it. Organisations are doing it, but I just think from the candidate point of view, as you rightly said in the beginning, a few of us haven't been in the market for a long time. And because you've got your experience, you just think the CV's fine. Well, it's not. You might need to redo it in a different way. It's just these hints and tips that organisations probably need to give that will make their job better, because you as a candidate will be better prepared. And I absolutely agree with that feedback piece, because if you don't get feedback, is a gift, all right, however it's served. And if you don't get it, at you're going to be thinking, well, why did I do that? What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? So it all helps. It's like a big loop.
Yeah, I think it's a simple rule, isn't it? I think of the feedback thing as very much like as a metaphysical exchange. It's energy in, energy out, you know. If you've asked like for more energy from the candidate, you've got to reciprocate that energy back. Now that's not to say you should give white glove treatment to every single applicant that comes through. You can't do that. There's thousands of people applying. We have an overload of applicants actually in this case, and that's just simply going to accelerate with the tools that applicants currently have. So you can't give white glove treatment to every single person. However, if you've asked that individual, you've taken them through deeper into the process and then asked them to do assessment or a test or your interview, second interview, third interview, whatever it is, you need to reciprocate the energy and commitment that that candidate's been has provided. And that you need to then white glove that treatment. You need to then put some concierge in there. So you've got to moderate your sort of effort based on how deep you've pulled that candidate in and how much energy you've asked that candidate to do. So I think that's just table stakes for recruiters, but maybe we've forgotten it as we go through. By the way, Helen, you mentioned a really important point as a tip for companies that could improve candidate experience very simply, and that's simply being transparent on the process of how you do intend to assess those candidates. You can publish that on the website. You know, there's no reason why that should not be in a in every job description or even on the default. Folks, our philosophy and assessment is this. This is how we do it. And then anybody who goes through that process is going to basically have already agreed that that is the process. And you'll find that that's got to have an effect on their opinion on the candidate experience, you know? So yeah.
Can I just say one more thing? And
Please.
Vicky and I caught up this week, actually. You would never go into a restaurant and wait at the door with nobody coming to speak to you to seat you, nobody asking you what you wanted from the menu, and then nobody talking to you when they delivered your food. So it's the same, like we give our energy and our applications to roles, and then we don't hear anything back. So that employer brand piece, is really poor. So just, I know we're not going to dive into the recruitment process, but there's lots of really small wins that some of these teams can make. And one of them is telling you on the website what those steps are. It doesn't matter how basic 101 it is, but they manage expectations.
Yeah, I would add to that, Helen, as well, that I agree, the transparency would be great. But I think some reassurance probably too, because I think if you're used to the old version of an interview process where you're asked about your CV and everything else, and then at the end you get your chance to ask your questions about the organisation, there might be a perception that people think, oh, am I still going to get my chance as well? If we go into this whole skill-based methodology, does that mean that interaction that I get what I need out of that conversation still happens? So I think there needs to be some reassurance there that it isn't all just about you being assessed in the company's eyes for the skills that they want. It's a two-way street, isn't it? It's about whether the company's the right fit for the candidate, etc.
I think it's also just picking up on this. I saw something in the chat, people talking about, sorry, TA teams. Because they're the first, like the canary in the coal mine, they've been kind of gutted, for want of a better word. And so they are, and maybe the more senior people who are more expensive, and oh yeah, this is an opportunity for you, junior TA person, to act up and develop your career in a kind of perhaps essentially more cynical view on saving some salary. They are desperate. I don't think there's any lack of intent to provide a great experience, but it's just they don't have the tools, they don't have the time, they don't have the experience to do this. So I think it's very easy to kind of beat up on the recruitment teams by providing a poor experience. And I think it's a great analogy, the restaurant analogy, but it's kind of, you're expecting sixth formers to run a restaurant is possibly the situation that some teams are in.
Well, someone actually mentioned it in, I think it was Steve actually, who's dominating the chat, by the way. Please make sure Steve doesn't dominate the chat. But he did mention something to the effect of we kind of denuded the TA teams because we've chopped them down. And then obviously that means there's lots of TA folks that are on the job market that are then applying for these jobs to these companies that actually now have denuded TA teams. So actually, we've got undercapacity, under-resourced functions that are kind of trying to obviously optimize with new technology and trying to do more with less, but that's a transition. We haven't got to that point at this stage, and therefore the experience the experience for recruiters that are now applying is shockingly bad, because we kind of understand how candidate experience works, but we're going into a kind of a skeleton staff, so to say. We're kind of applying to a company that has, radically rejigged its organization, and in fact, probably targeted the more expensive, more experienced resources, so they're actually less experienced than they were before in the past. So again, this is not a justification, but maybe go some way towards an explanation as to why this experience has been so tough. Go ahead, Marlon.
Yeah, I would like to sort of add, connect to what we've all been talking about, but also in the chat, and two things. So the transparency and the communication, it's key. I think we're all agreed on that, but I love what Adam is saying. Like, I think candidates also have to sort of accept that right now we are going to work with a lot of automated feedback. And I also think that recruiters need to be brave enough to offer automated feedback, as long as you have a clear communication that this is to be expected. Because we know right now that we have a lot of applicants. There's no way for us to keep in touch with 50, 200, or sometimes 500 applicants. We don't have the time, and we don't have the staff to do it. However, if we are hoping to have a manual feedback, have an interaction, that this will keep us from talking about the automated feedback, and then we end up ghosting them instead, because we are always postponing and hoping to connect with them, and we end up not talking to them at all. So instead, I think we need this balance of candidates accepting automated feedback, and for us recruiters and TA to actually work better with our communication. So always have this automated feedback. Try to have as much communication as possible early on, in the middle, and in the end, and keep giving feedback. If you know that you're gonna run a long course of recruitment process, then just keep the feedback going. Like, we're still not where we are. We're having a few weeks more. We're still talking to applicants. Keep up, just keep up the communication, and it might be automated. Maybe you can send a video message that is generated equally to everybody, just to show your face and have somewhat more live interaction. But also, candidates need to accept that you won't get a phone call, and you won't get asked back to the office to go through your assessment results. You won't have that type of feedback because there's no time. And I think this is an important balance from the candidate perspective, but also from the TA perspective.
Yeah, so there's some tough love there from Marlon. I mean, basically, we need to have a reset of expectations. I think that's a fair comment to a degree, because let's imagine, the last time you were on the job market was pre-2021, let's say, and that was boom times. If you recall, only 3 years or so ago, everyone's phone was ringing off the hook. We're getting 3, 4, 5 messages per week. Everybody getting headhunted who's in the recruiting space. That was only like 18 months, 2 years or so ago. So maybe our expectations were super elevated at that point. And now suddenly, we find ourselves in a different marketplace. We've got to reset our expectations and say, look, this is just a totally different market now. It's a smaller market. That's a fact. And we've got to figure out, okay, what is an acceptable level of interaction with an organization. Now, I agree, automation can help. But at the same time, I think the black hole is still a persistent issue, right? So clearly, the implementation of technology, even basic stuff, is very uneven throughout the marketplace. So unfortunately, this black hole experience is quite persistent.
But also,
I don't have too many answers there. Adam, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think the most important answer you can get in a recruitment process is no. And as soon as possible, no, because then that's it. Fine, I don't have to think about it. But it's the not knowing that's the killer.
Yeah,
the ambiguity. Actually, let's talk about ambiguity. Ambiguity, my kind of amateur psychologist perspective. Marlon, you correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think ambiguity is the source of stress. Like, if you know a disaster's coming, that's disastrous. But it's
Yeah.
like, okay, the stress doesn't seem to be the same because you know this disaster's there and it's going to happen. Whereas if you kind of like literally have a gray fog, you're just waiting for something. That's like mega stressful. And it just builds up until you have a resolution. What is that phenomenon? Do you know anything about why we have that sort of thing in our heads?
Well, because I mean, it just in general, not knowing is the worst thing ever because it keeps our cognitive load always thinking about the next step. When will I find out? I will be looking at my cell phone. I will be recessing my email. I will always be looking for information, and I can't really move on and think about the next step until I know. So this is quite like this is just common sense. It's not even psychology. Like we want to know, and we always talk about this big myth that oh, you should never give a negative answer on a Friday before a weekend. And it's like, yes, you should, because it's better to give an answer on Friday so you can let go and you can let loose. You can be mad all Saturday and Sunday if you want to, but at least you will know. So the worst part isn't having a negative feedback, it's having no feedback at all. And we need to sort of move past this myth that we should wait until the perfect timing for us to give a good negative feedback in the best possible way. Because honestly, there is no good way to really communicate that you didn't get the job. You just need to communicate the fact. Like that's the most important step.
Yeah, I think we should be really getting towards 100% communication
Yeah.
on not success. So I think
Transparency.
candidates are mature enough to understand. I would say most candidates, not everybody, but I think most candidates are mature enough to understand they're not going to convert every single application into a job. I mean, that's just normal, right? But you've got to be able to close off those super loose ends. Imagine if you're applying like 50 jobs a week or something. They're just 50 loose ends you've got to try and close away. And that, as you say, the cognitive effort to have those things in your mind must be super high. We actually had a complaint in the online community earlier today about unprepared candidates, totally unprepared candidates. Who showed up to interviews. They were actually successful to be selected at interviews, and they didn't even know about the company.
Yeah.
Now, I thought that was weird, but then I kind of thought, you know what? Maybe that's a symptom of them being super used to not getting any feedback whatsoever, so that they just applied and forgot about it. And then, oh, we've got an interview, and then they showed up. And it kind of leads to kind of bad behaviors, almost like as a mutually reinforcing thing. So yeah, I think we can definitely start being more disciplined with a no. Although I would put a caveat in to say, you can be too early with a no, because oftentimes an instant rejection is perceived to be a rejection where you've not been fully considered for the role, and people can get very annoyed by that. And in fact, there's been a case, there's been a lawsuit, in fact, in the US where a candidate is suing it's Workday. They're suing Workday for ageism because they thought that they've been filtered out and the reason why they felt that is because they got an instant rejection. Now that's because they just felt, look, I applied. What else could they veto me on? It must be date of birth. Boom, I'm out. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But I think Workday's in trouble because they had some sort of filter which could describe the date of birth of the person. So there is some sort of caveat. I think the best time to reject, you could just time delay it, basically time shift the rejection. Adam doesn't like this. But I've got a problem with instant rejection. I've got to say, unless the job's done. Unless
I
the
think
job
it's about transparency. It's like you
Yeah.
need to be absolutely clear. And we have a principle in our company of truth, and as that applies to the recruiting process, our kind of head of talent describes that if we know it, the candidate should know it. So actually, if Workday shared if their criteria, their filtering criteria, then there would be no issue. And I think this kind of I think that is a sticking plaster. This like, oh, delay it to make it look like we considered it, but that doesn't change the facts. And I think just pulling back on this kind of this stress point, the lack of communication is the most biggest cause of stress for candidates. About 40% of candidates that we see in our research across the board say this, but it's especially acute for neurodiverse candidates. You get to sort of levels of sort of 56, 58% of those candidates find that really stressful not hearing anything. And so this is another important aspect of this. So I don't think we should be trying to find sticking plaster solutions to try and pretend that we're assessing. Truth, transparency is the most important tool we have.
All right, I think that's a
I actually
powerful
agree with
comment. Do
that.
you agree with Adam Bird there? Let me know in the comments. What do you think? Should we just be straight up and say right away that's the case and just take sort of the handling, or should we do a time shift? Let me know in the comments, folks. Happy to be heckled on this. Let's see what the verdict is. By the way, there was something I was about to say, which actually really quite which added to this a little bit. Why would there be that job? That part of the problem may be the existence, our failure to kind of take a job down. Like we post a job typically. I think time duration is still the most common way in which a job is published. In other words, it defaults to 30 days or however much we paid for. And actually, we don't have a very convenient way to pull that job down, despite the fact we might have a shortlisted bunch of candidates. It's actually a really good argument for the use of programmatic advertising. And again, I don't want to, shill on a particular type of technology, but we need to be better at shutting down a job where we no longer require those candidates. And we need to make that an automated process, that it isn't a case where individual recruiters have to make that decision or hiring managers need to make that decision, because you're never going to make that decision. It's similar to, I mean, the reverse side of that is, when you're a candidate and you're registered on a database, how many times do you actually take your details off once you found a job? You don't. You just say, okay, fine, I found a job, and you move on with your life. And then it's only when you get a bunch of calls coming in to say, oh, crap, my CV's still a monster or something, that you might then go and deactivate it. So it's quite normal, I think, not to do it. We just need an automated solution. So programmatic advertising, I think that's got to be a way forward, particularly for high volume. We need a solution for smaller volume, because right now programmatic only seems to work for mega scale hiring. Auto closing a job, there we go. How do we do that? I don't know. I mean, are there tools and ATSs that do this? Right now, I'm not sure. They should be. Adam, you got any thoughts on this? I mean, you've got any insight on where the product development is in terms of shutting these jobs down once they've hit a threshold?
Well, the whole notion of doing it when you hit a threshold, I'm not quite sure I like that as a hiring process either. This idea that you kind of define a cohort and have to choose the one from the cohort doesn't fit with my kind of view on hiring anyway. And I'm not really close to that job process. But I think if you're stuck and the job's up and you've hired for it, you just have to, that's your auto response. Really sorry. I know the job's up. We've hired it. Good luck in your search. That's to Marlin's point earlier on. That's a great use of automation.
And I think I want to add something also and connect back to when we were talking about skill-based hiring. I think when it comes to communication and being transparent, you can't just use the headline, we're working with skills-based recruitment. Because this means 10 different things to 10 different recruiters, and it means 20 different things to 20 different organizations. Skill-based hiring does not mean that you are objective. It does not mean that you are working with a structured scoring and assessment. It just means that you're looking for skills first. And you can do this using traditional methods and actually use pretty poor assessments to define what skills are. And this is also where the transparency and the communication is so, so important. You need to explain, what does this mean in this particular process? And this is where you can actually give instant feedback, because if, as Adam said, if you are super clear on your criteria, how you will measure them, and if there are any cutoffs, then you can just add to that. Like for this instance, we have some level of experience that is a high criteria. And if you don't meet that criteria, then you can actually have an instant feedback. Or if we're looking for instant feedback after 5 people have applied, and you have your top 4 that they all scored really high and matched your profile, then you can say that right now we already have 3 people who have a high score match. We are going to talk to them. If things change, we will get back to you. But as of now, you are not in the top 5 of our candidates that we are going to meet in a structured interview. So that's
well and good, but the reality is that needs to be a system, right? There's no way an under-resourced recruiting team is going to do it. I think that's the problem. Like one of the problems of advertising a job generally is that we can't predict the amount of effort the recruiters are required to deal with it, because is it going to be 10 applicants or is it going to be 10,000 applicants? We actually don't know until we publish the job. So we can't adequately organize resources to deal with the applicant flow unless we have an automated system which does cap the number of applicants that come in. Now, Adam, I totally get what you're saying. It's like, look, listen, we want to cast a wide net and give everyone a fair chance. But the reality of it is, I think you can kind of shut jobs down more effectively if you connect it with ATS progress. So for instance, let's say I've got 3 candidates through to second interview for a 3-stage interview process. In other words, we're going to move these people into quite close to final stage. It would be great if I had a way to shut that job down or pause it so that I'm not accepting more people at the beginning of the funnel who I'm not going to talk to because they're 2 weeks out from that process. So I think the technology is going to be there. I'm hoping ATSs are producing this technology. It's not that hard to do. Again, I lean on a little bit of programmatic because that's connected to where the job has gone externally. This is where ATSs need to talk to advertising distributors, so to say. And they need to work together to make sure that these jobs, as candidates see them, are actually live. So we're not applying to what isn't affected their job. You know what I mean? Anyway, Vicky, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to make a point about what we're describing in terms of the candidate experience, the ambiguity, the keeping people hanging, the ghosting, and the impact that has, not just on those who are regretted, but on the people who join the organisation. Because we know that there's massive variance, isn't there, between candidates when they join the organisation and their time to productivity as a metric, or their engagement as a metric. And we know that the higher their engagement, the faster their time to productivity. So I just think that there's a whole angle on the business case for an improved candidate experience, which isn't just about, we know that poor candidate experience can affect reputation. Okay, so there's a business risk, and that you can assign a cost or risk cost to that as a business. But actually, I think there's also a cost that can be brought into the business case about how you've treated somebody. You've made them feel respected. You've made them feel like they belong. You've made them feel things which are in line with your company values as part of the candidate experience. And then when they join, they're moving forward into productivity and engagement. And hopefully then also less early attrition. I think the candidate experience it's like somebody doesn't just take off their head and their heart when they sign the contract and go, yes, I accept the offer. They carry all that stuff with them when they walk into the organisation too.
That's a really good observation.
Reflection.
Yeah, I wonder whether anybody listening here, I mean, have you had a bad candidate experience and then taken the job? Let me know what you're like. How did you feel about this? Like, did you come in? I'm interested in your psychology. Like, you've had a terrible experience, but you know what? Somehow the job's actually been offered to you. Did you take it? If so, how did it go? It's an interesting kind of experiment to think about. Let me know in the chat.
I think
okay.
people will. In the
Yes.
current climate, I think people will take jobs even if they've had a poor candidate experience, but there's still a flight risk.
Yeah.
I
think it's a temporary yes, isn't it?
Disengaged when they join the organisation, impacts on team morale, etc., etc., etc. It's
when the market picks up, people will move on, won't they? When the market picks up.
Yeah.
And actually, that's actually a perception that's worth talking about really briefly, because I wonder whether part of the problem that as experienced candidates have in the current job market is this sense of flight risk, perceived flight risk from the employer side, where they might be thinking, you know what, this job isn't quite big enough for this person's level of experience. They've got the skills, they've got this, and this, but I don't think they're going to be there for 6 months. They're going to keep on the market and keep looking. Is that a legitimate concern? How do candidates alleviate that? Like, what's the story or thoughts on that? So I think that's one of the concerns as you get older as an individual. It's quite a common bit of feedback I'm getting from a veteran job seekers, so to say, that are fully prepared to take a different level of job or take a different role. But they're perceived to be, you know what, this guy's going to be gunning for the head of type of position, or they're not going to be fully satisfied with what we've got on offer. Any thoughts on this? Like, is it a fair comment? Is it a fair position from employers? Or is there anything that a candidate can do to alleviate those issues? Any ideas there? I'll open it to anybody with thoughts on this.
I'll just
I
jump in
think if that thought is in somebody's, I think if that thought is in somebody's head when they're interviewing you, it's going to be really hard to shift that thought. Okay. No matter what you say, and you can say, no, do you want me to commit for however long? You don't say that in an interview, but it's really hard if somebody is going into an interview from a candidate side, and you might have been out of work for an awfully long time. Financial issues are front of mind for some people, and it's like, I'll take any job. I just want to have my self-worth back and be able to demonstrate to an organization that I am excellent at what I do. Because it's a tough one, Han, actually, because if the person that is interviewing you thinks she's going to move on in 6 months' time, no matter what you say, but I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is, actually. Bring somebody in that has got experience, that has got energy, that is passionate, that wants to do a fantastic job. See where it goes.
A quick one, Helen. Would it be better for that to be an explicit conversation? So rather than the employer suspecting or
I think
feeling.
so, actually. I think so. It's all about the honesty, isn't it? As we talked about, and the feedback. And if you can build up an honest relationship with whoever's interviewing you, and it probably will be your boss, even better, I think. Because organizations talk about the amazing experiences they give to their customers. If give an amazing experience to somebody that you're interviewing with, and if that conversation is, whoever, Helen, thank you, but actually, at least you've had that conversation, and you as an individual think, all right, gave it my best shot, maybe slightly channel visioned, not really the growth mindset that I wanted in a new organization. So
I think it's hard though, because as soon as you deviate from a structured process where you're not asking all the candidates the same questions or having the same conversations, you will be biased, and you don't know who will appreciate your honesty and appreciate this transparency from a candidate perspective, and who will sort of give you a no on the spot. So I think, like, in theory, super. But in real life, I don't think it works, because we're not that good at being objective and actually assessing these kind of situations and these discussions. Because it's also, like, I always ask, when people say motivation is so interesting to look for in the beginning of the recruitment process, and I ask why, and they said because it's so important to understand why you want to be at this organization or in this job. But how do you assess what a good motivation is? Is it that you love this organization and you've been looking for them for 20 years? Or is it that, oh, I haven't had a job for 2 years and I need money? Situation.
You want to say something there, Adam? Go ahead. Marlon,
Yeah.
I think Marlon's got a point. Like, part of our problem of our attempt to de-bias interviewing is that, are we then kind of literally reading a script, in which case, why don't we just use a robot to do the interview? If we're saying we have to be completely ask the same questions all the time, boom, 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 literally, why is a human being there? A human being hopefully is there to provide a judgment and maybe have the EQ to judge whether the person's able to accept an honest conversation. And that's not always the case. Some candidates are not able to do it. We can understand it's a risky move for a hiring manager to take, or a recruiter to take. However, I would hope that we were able to do that. Adam, you definitely want to say something. I want to get your insight on this.
So I think no recruitment process is objective. You're always, even if you're asking the same questions, you're making a quantitative assessment of the answers and their fit for your organization. And I think that's the other really important point, the fit for your organization. So for us, truth is foundational. It's like everything we do, and we are, for many people, brutally truthful in the way we deal with each other and through the interview process. So personally, I'm hiring more senior people. I look to qualify people out, and I make this explicit in the interview process as early as possible, get the difficult questions out of the way. And so we can have these really candid conversations with people, because unless we can do that, in many ways, that's part of our filtering process, is because you're not going to be successful at our organization if you're not comfortable having these candid conversations. So I think staying true to your organizational principles and the way you operate as an organization. So we talk about transparency, that's useful, but it depends how transparent you are as an organization, or whether, for example, delaying a response by 24 hours is a way of pretending that you're doing something else. That just wouldn't fly in our organization. So I think
But then
every
this should
interview
be a
process.
criteria as well. And then this has to be in the job ad. So, and
Oh,
this is like, this is all I'm
absolutely.
saying. Like, in theory, these things are great, but you can't add stuff in the end. Like,
No.
all of the things you're discussing, it has to be in the job ad. It has to be measurable criteria, and you have to be straightforward from the beginning.
Yes.
And I think that's where we deviate, because I think in theory, we would love to assess these things. But honestly, us as human beings, we're not that good at being objective. We're not that good at making these quantitative measures. That's the problem. And especially today, because I've seen a lot of comments in the chat right now that we have a lot of young and junior TA teams. They do not have the skills to make these assessments of candidates fairly and objective. This is why we have such a high level of discrimination when it comes to age, especially ethnicity. We're not that good. I wish we were. I wish we needed human interaction in interviews and in recruitment process, because it should be a positive thing, but it's also the biggest obstacle in us being fair and hiring the top talent.
Yeah, a quick interlude, guys. Sorry, quick interlude. We've only got about 7 minutes left, everybody. So if you've got any questions for this amazing panel, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom. We're going to get to them in about 3 minutes, okay? So use the Q&A feature if you've got any questions on any of these particular topics. Okay, Vicky, I think you were saying something.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to come back to what Adam and Marlon have been talking about. You know, if we don't ask some of the questions in our heads as recruiters, if because we want to ask people all the same questions, if we don't ask any case-specific ones, then we keep our own assumptions. We haven't given an opportunity for our brain to be challenged by what the real response is. Do you know what I mean? So would it just increase bias if we don't ask some of those conversations that, you know, trying to assess whether somebody is a flight risk because they're too senior in the role? It's a bit like the old, you know, not giving any people feedback. You know, like Helen said earlier, feedback is a gift, and it's a gift because it allows someone to see themselves in a different way. And if you don't give people feedback, then you're not being fair to them. You're not setting them up for success. And I also think this is the similar case here, that if you don't actually face into some of those questions, you just walk away with your own assumptions in your head.
And I sort of agree. Only the fact, I mean, the truth's in the pudding, we discriminate. And if we were good at doing these kind of assessments and asking the right kind of questions and making a fair judgment based on that, then we wouldn't see this problem with discrimination. Because we also have to, all information we gather, we also have to sort of give feedback to the hiring managers, and they might interpret things differently than we do, because we have the expertise. We knew why we asked a question, and we know how to assess it. But giving the feedback to other people who are joined in the decision might not interpret the same way. And I'm not saying it's not good. It's not relevant. It's just we need to be super careful, because every time we deviate from the structure, we risk bias coming into our decision. And it's crucial, both for the individual, but also for the organizations. And I think we need to sort of accept that we have faults as human beings when it comes to decision makings, and most people also have a tendency to have a bigger belief in their experience and their judgments than most people. We're more confident in our own judge making than we should be.
I think on this, I mean, sorry, Adam, we've got to interrupt here. But I think on this, the philosophical conflict is, look, do we trust the human judgment, or can we externalize that judgment into some structure that anybody can pick up and use? And I think that's something that we're wrestling with in a way that we haven't come to an overly satisfactory conclusion. Go ahead, Adam. I don't want to interrupt you over it. I want you to say what you want to say.
I think just because something's difficult doesn't mean we shouldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And also, the kind of sticking to the same set of questions presupposes that we've got the right set of questions at the start of the process. And to Vicky's point, pulling those threads with people, understanding the story behind them, helps us better understand the types of candidates that we're assessing for this role and helps us improve that process. But this is why you have 2-3 people on a panel, as you get those different perspectives, and different people can then assess each other. So yes, if there's someone who's more expert on the kind of, it's not objective, it's tending towards objectivity, then that's really powerful, because then they can kind of pull in other assumptions. But those people who are perhaps biased are going to start pulling on things which might expose other things that we want to learn. So I think it's far more powerful to learn as much as possible about someone and learn how to ask the questions and evolve that question set.
I agree.
Yeah.
Let's just keep it to the maybe 2 final candidates and not do it as 50 and in the beginning, because we
Oh,
need
yes.
to move the
Yes.
subjectivity to the end. And I think if we do that, we might be able to use them correctly. However, right now, the traditional way is the most average way. And we tend to ask these kind of questions to the 15 first candidates, and then we won't
Right.
succeed. And I think
Okay.
that's
Yes,
crucial
absolutely
also
agree.
to understand. And I would just like to say, I don't think this is a philosophical question. I think this should be an evidence-based situation. I think we shouldn't see this as a philosophical question, but as a research question. Like, we have statistics, we have research that said some methods are better than others. They're not perfect, but they are way better than most traditional ones.
Okay, let's by the way, Steve, you're mixing your parables, but that's all good. I think there was only 3 blind men in the elephant story, but yeah, go with 12. Why not have more? I don't have a problem with that. Guys, we're gonna sort of come to the questions now, and then I want to finish off with a return to the candidate psychology. I think it's been a fascinating conversation on sort of the interaction with how employers can do a better job on candidate experience and the assessment side. But let's go back to candidate psychology. I want everyone to think a little bit about what type of tips can you give to a candidate who's on the job market today and encountering some of these issues. Like, what psychological things should they be bearing in mind to help kind of empower them to be more successful in market conditions that we have. So let's go to the first question here. We've got Ben Walsh. Ben is saying, okay, with the way cost of living is dramatically increasing, do you think candidates' salary expectations are too high compared to what companies can offer at the moment? I personally think candidates are being flexible. I don't know what the panel thinks, but everyone I've spoke to has generally said, you know what, we recognize that's a situation. Maybe it's down to who's on the market and isn't. If you're on the job market involuntarily, I think you're being hyper flexible. If you're currently in situ, you're probably not moving without, I would say, a significant uplift. That's my assessment of this. Is the market's bifurcated. What are your thoughts, everyone? Anybody got a comment to make on Ben's question there?
I agree with what you said, Hung, and some of those roles that are being advertised at the moment, their salaries are lower, a lot lower than people are expecting. And I think there's 4 of us that actually applied for one role, and we all said the same thing.
Yep.
We would have, maybe 18 months ago, it would have been a lot higher. And it goes back to what we were saying before about taking a job. If there's a financial pressure, absolutely. However, when the market changes, then would that person then move on?
Yeah, I think that's the answer, Ben. So, okay, we're running out of time, so I'm really sorry, everyone, but let's try and fire through real quick in 20 seconds or less. What tip would you give to an experienced job seeker today? Adam Bird, your thoughts?
I don't have any tips. I'm sorry. I would hate to be in the market right now.
No, I think just recognizing the reality of it is one of the things that we need to bear in mind. It's not a personal thing. It is just a market-wide phenomenon. Vicky, your thoughts?
I would just say, try not to take it personally.
Yep, I think that's basics in it. Very good. Helen? Excuse me.
Look after your health, both mental and physical, and don't, get out there, exercise, make sure you're eating properly, you're sleeping properly, and rightly so, it's not probably your fault. You've just got to have a well-being about you.
Very, very good. It's a holistic well-being, folks. You can sit in front of the computer and think that's all you do. That's not what you should be doing. Make sure you take a walk every single day. Marlon, final word to you, bit of advice to a job seeker right now.
my words of advice would be prepare, prepare, prepare. Seek information about what skills-based hiring means, what common tools and assessments you should be prepared for, and demand information and transparency from your recruiter. Ask why they are using different assessments and what to expect.
Yep, that's a very, very good tip. Once you're applying, if you have interaction with the recruiter, ask what is the assessment process. That's going to eliminate some of the ambiguity that's causing you stress down the road. Okay, folks, we're over time, so we're going to get kicked off this platform anytime right now. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Adam Bird. Thank you, Vicky Saunders. Thank you, Helen James. Thank you, Marlin. I can't pronounce your second name yet, but we'll just say Marlin for now. And thank you, everyone in the crowd, for your wonderful contributions. It's been a great conversation. Take care of yourself. Make sure you're connected to everyone. Make sure you're learning all the time from your peer group. And good luck in the job search, folks.
Thank you.
Happy Easter to everyone.
Yes.
And you. Bye.